we're going to have a second keynote presentation on the topic of the heroism of innovation. This will be presented by Dr. Tony Salvador. Tony Salvador is the Director of Research and Definition for the Emerging Markets Platforms Group, EMPG, within the Intel Corporation. Tony leads a team of ethnographers and other social scientists, designers, business analysts, and technology architects who try to look for, find, and develop viable opportunities for creating local and sustainable solutions with high-tech products. Tony, you're welcome.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Dr. Alipui and Mr. Baswan for their comments as well as John Gage's comments this morning. I found Mr. Baswan's comments particularly interesting because of the references to the accidental reform and also the references of sort of how corruption can actually influence reform. I'm not going to argue that we should instill corruption in all of our systems to catalyze reform, but I am going to argue that if we think about human systems, then maybe we can be more intentional about some of the accidental reform. And so that's what I'll talk about today. This is Jason. I'm going to tell a story that many people know, but maybe not everyone. So Jason was a hero of Greek myth, and he went after something called the golden fleece. The golden fleece is a pelt of a flying golden goat. The flying golden goat delivered a very important person to a king in another place, Anatolia somewhere, at one point, and that was the backstory. Jason was born to a king, and then his uncle usurped the throne. Jason grew up, he came of age. Someone told him, hey, you're actually the rightful king, at which point he said, wow, I should be king. What do I have to do to be king? And it turns out getting the golden fleece was the trick to becoming the king. So he had been in his society growing up as Jason. He became aware that he should be king in his society that already has a particular system going on with Uncle King, right? And then he goes off on a series of adventures to get to be king, right? He leaves, he goes off, he gets to the new king that has the fleece. He asked nicely, he said, can I have this fleece? Because if I get this fleece, then I get to be king. The king said no, and he was about to actually have Jason executed. And then the goddess Hera actually intervened, softened the king, who then gave Jason 4 tasks to get through. Really kind of hard tasks. You have to tame these fire-breathing bulls with brass hooves, actually sow a seed with dragon's teeth. The dragon's teeth will promote the growth of these soldiers who are going to kill him if they actually grow. And Jason had to get through all of these different trials, and he gets through them with the help of the king's daughter, Medea, who Hera has caused to fall madly in love with Jason. And as a sorceress, she actually promotes all of these potions, and she gets Jason through every one of the trials, at which point Jason gets the fleece and fleeces the king in the process. And you might actually imagine then, right, that it's Medea who saved his hide, right? And then they return, they go back to the Jason's kingdom. The fleece has healing powers, changes the society, he becomes king, and he marries another girl, right? So I want to tell you that story because I think we'll return to it a couple of times in the brief time I have. But there's 2 reasons. One is that I'd like us to point to the preparation that Jason had to go through. Then there was all the adventure stuff, and then there's the return, right? We don't usually talk about that too much, and I didn't either. We talked about all the exploits and the fire-breathing bulls and all of that kind of thing. But the second reason that I tell it is because it's fundamentally a human story, right? There's some technology involved. This golden fleece is kind of fancy. But it's really a human story, and that's really what we're talking about today. A couple of things as I was looking around on the net for this. That's probably one of the more beautiful images of the whole sort of Jason and the fleece. This one is actually one of my favorites because it's French from the Argonauticon sometime, I think, around 1300 or 1500, I don't remember. But it's remarkable how everybody looks French here, right? I mean, Jason has a suit of armor. It's really fantastic. And then this is a more modern one. This is something you might imagine as a really human story. Here's Jason and Medea with the fleece sort of gently covering some sort of indelicate parts as they enjoy their fleece moment. What I'd like to do is to just be a little bit serious for a moment. I'd like to move us in the next 15 minutes from an old definition of development that's something more like this, sort of generic improvement in countries' economic and social conditions, to something not quite as easy, trippingly off the tongue, but something that I think is a little bit more actionable. And you can look at it, and we'll go through this. But I'll read it. It's innovation in novel and or non-indigenous systems and social structures, right? That changes the existing systems and social structures that I contend may actually threaten them. And Mr. Boswan pointed to those quite clearly in some of his comments. Sustainable development there is then actually developing these new landscapes, these new systems and social structures that have an increased probability of fitness, right? Of being able to survive autocatalytic processes. And I think that's a human systems problem. So we're going to go through this point by point. We're going to make a little foray through complex adaptive systems, move on to some disruptive innovation concepts, look at power and social structures, and then end with a little bit of summary. But I want to go back to the hero's journey. There's a really lovely book Joseph Campbell wrote in 1959. I believe it was 59. It is actually a really lovely book, and I suggest that you read the book if you really want to understand the hero's journey. There's plenty on the internet, and you can go there now and search hero's journey, and you'll find all kinds of stuff. You'll find these 9 things. What he did is actually read through almost all mythology on the whole history of the world and ended up pulling out a pattern, what he calls the monomyth, one structure that is common to almost all myth in human societies over history. And it turns out it's actually remarkable. Hollywood has made great use of it. George Lucas very consciously made use of it when he wrote Star Wars and did all of that. There's definitely a departure zone, right, the preparation for Jason. There's what he calls initiation, which is all the stuff you do in the middle to get the job done. And then there's the return. In the mythologies, the preparation, the departure, and the return are very important. They're considered really important for the benefit to the society, the benefit to the system, right? And there are tools along the way that you can use if you follow the hero's journey as you're thinking about innovation practice, right? At the end, I'll talk about what some of those are. And if you send me email in a couple of months, there'll be a paper on this. But if you actually think about it in the book, you can actually, at every stage, as you go through some of these, you can imagine to yourself how your practices have actually mimicked some of this, if not all of it, right, as you've gone through. And you can think about what tools that you had as you went along the way. The other reason that I mentioned this particular structure is because it's fundamentally a discussion of 2 systems, 2 human systems. There's the system that the hero is in before and after, and then there's the system that the hero is in during, right? And if we think about development and think about development activities, whether you're an NGO or a multilateral organization or a corporation, when you're creating, let's use business talk, when you're creating a new market, right, you're going from markets that you know or conditions you know, and you're moving to conditions that you don't know and don't understand and trying to do something there, and then maybe trying to bring some value back to the system or organization where you were. It's very much the hero's journey, right? And if we think about it that way, and if it really worked for all of mythology, then maybe it can actually work for our development. So hold that.